She looked like just another homeless girl on the street, but when she begged Big Shaq for help, he had no idea he was about to uncover a secret buried by one of the richest families in the country. Hook, she said her name was Elena, but the bracelet on her wrist told a very different story. What started as a late-night act of kindness would unravel a twisted family secret, a fake death, and a billion-dollar lie. This isn't just a story about homelessness, it's a story about betrayal, survival, and the power of being seen. Stay tuned, because the truth Big Shaq discovers will leave you speechless. The night air in London had a sharp bite to it, one of those early spring evenings that teased warmth during the day, but turned bitter once the sun disappeared. Big Shaq had just finished a charity event at a local community center, where he'd rapped, laughed, and posed for selfies with kids. But behind the energy and the bright lights, something felt off. Maybe it was the stories he'd heard that night, or maybe it was just life catching up with him. So instead of calling his driver, he decided to take a walk. No entourage, no cameras, just him and the silence of the city. A few blocks away from the venue, he turned down a side street, a shortcut he'd taken before. But something was different tonight. The alley was dimly lit, half the streetlights flickering or dead. As he walked, his boots echoed against the cobbled path, and that's when he saw her. A small figure, curled up on flattened cardboard behind a row of garbage bins, wrapped in a blanket so thin it barely looked like fabric. Her hoodie was pulled low over her face, and her knees were hugged to her chest. Even from a distance, Shaq could see her shivering. He almost walked past, but then her voice stopped him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could you spare some change, or maybe a meal?" Shaq turned. She didn't look up, didn't move, just sat there, like she'd been defeated 100 times and expected the same now. But something in her voice made him pause. It wasn't just the desperation, it was the way she spoke. Clear, almost refined. Not what he expected. He stepped close. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Elena. You hungry?" Again, a pause, then a tiny nod. "I know a place down the street still open. Come on, let's get you something hot." She didn't move right away, as if unsure if he was serious. Then slowly she stood. Shaq noticed how thin she was, frail even, like she hadn't had a proper meal in days. He offered her his hoodie, but she shook her head. The cafe was a 24-hour spot, mostly serving night shift workers and late-night wanderers. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. They slid into a booth in the corner, and Shaq ordered 2 hot chocolates and some food pancakes, eggs, toast. He didn't ask what she wanted. She looked like she needed everything. For a while she said nothing, just sipped her drink, eyes fixed on the table. Then slowly she pulled back her hoodie. Shaq blinked. She couldn't have been older than 16. Her features were delicate, her skin pale from cold or exhaustion, or maybe both. Her hair, though messy, looked like it had once been well kept. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. She didn't look like most of the homeless youth Shaq had seen before. There was something different, something off. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. She glanced at him, then out the window. "It's a long story. I've got time." She played with the edge of her sleeve. "I wasn't always like this. I used to live in a big house, private school, piano lessons, the whole thing. Then one night, it all disappeared." Shaq leaned forward. "How?" "My parents died," she said. Her voice wavered for the first time. "In a fire. At least that's what the news said." He frowned. "You don't believe it?" She shrugged. "I don't know what to believe anymore." There was silence between them for a moment, filled only by the distant hum of a coffee machine and soft jazz playing over the speaker. Then without warning, Elena lifted her wrist and pushed back her sleeve. Shaq noticed it for the first time. A thin silver bracelet with a tiny charm. "Nice bracelet," he said. She quickly pulled the sleeve back down. "It was my mum's. Only thing I grabbed when I ran." Shaq nodded slowly. "Ran from what?" Another long silence. "People came to our house that night," she said. "Men in suits. I heard shouting downstairs. Then the fire alarm started going off. I remember smoke, screams, but no fire trucks ever came. I ran out the back, hid in the woods behind our property until sunrise." Shaq narrowed his eyes. "You never went to the police?" She shook her head. "And say what?" "That my billionaire parents didn't die in a fire because I heard shouting in the middle of the night. I was 14. No one would have believed me." "Billionaire," Shaq echoed. Elena froze. "Forget I said that." But it was too late. Shaq was now fully alert. "I think I know who you are," he said slowly. "Your face, it looks familiar." Her eyes widened. "Please, don't say anything. I'm not ready. I didn't ask for money or a handout, I just needed something warm. I leave after this. She stood suddenly, grabbing the leftover toast and stuffing it in her coat pocket. Shaq reached out, but she pulled back. Thank you, she whispered. You're the first person who looked at me like a human being in months. And just like that, she turned and walked out of the cafe. Shaq sat there stunned, a dozen questions spinning in his head. Who was she really? What was she running from? And why did she have a bracelet that looked like it belonged in a museum? He looked down at his phone, ready to call someone, maybe the police, or a friend in the media. But then he stopped. This wasn't just a random homeless girl. This was something bigger, something dangerous. And somehow Shaq had just stepped right into the middle of it. The clatter of cutlery and the soft hum of conversation filled the cafe, but Big Shaq barely noticed any of it. His eyes kept drifting to the delicate silver bracelet on Elena's wrist. It didn't belong on a girl who had been sleeping in an alley behind garbage bins. It gleamed under the warm lights, too pristine, too perfect. It wasn't costume jewelry, it was real, he could tell. Nice bracelet, he said casually, trying not to sound suspicious. Elena flinched. She instinctively tugged her sleeve down, hiding the bracelet from view. It belonged to my mom, she said quickly. She gave it to me before everything. Shaq didn't press her, he didn't want to spook her, but a tiny bell rang in the back of his mind. That bracelet didn't just belong to someone important, it meant something. He was sure of it. Still, he stayed quiet. Pushing too hard might make her disappear for good. Instead, he kept the conversation light, asking if she liked music, where she used to live, her favorite food. She answered in short, guarded bursts, but every now and then, a little smile would escape her, or her eyes would light up when he mentioned old-school cartoons. She wasn't a hardened runaway, she was a kid who'd seen too much, too fast. When they finished eating, Shaq pulled out his wallet and booked her a room at a nearby hotel. Nothing fancy but clean and warm. As they walked there, Elena stayed close to the shadows, flinching at sirens and crossing guards like they were threats. When they reached the lobby, she hesitated before stepping in. You sure it's okay? She asked. Shaq nodded. Absolutely, just for the night. Get some rest. I leave my number with the front desk. Call me if you need anything, alright? She looked at him for a long time, as if searching for signs of a trap. Then finally, she whispered, "Thank you," and walked slowly toward the elevator. Shaq watched until the doors closed. He didn't expect to see her again. The next morning, just as he was pouring cereal into a bowl, his phone buzzed. Unknown caller, 7:12 a.m. He picked up. "Hello, Mr. Shaq?" a woman's voice said. "I'm calling from the hotel. The girl you checked in last night. Elena? She's gone." Shaq's heart skipped. Gone. She left early, before sunrise. Quiet. Left something behind for you at the front desk. Shaq was already out the door before she finished speaking. When he arrived, the concierge handed him a small white envelope and a velvet pouch. The envelope had his name scribbled on it in uneven handwriting. He opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper, lined notebook paper, torn at the edges. The note read, "Thank you for seeing me as a person. I have to fix something before it's too late. If you're reading this, please don't try to find me, but if you do, look for the name Valeria Kingsley." Shaq's eyes stopped cold. Valeria Kingsley, the name rang in his ears like a fire alarm. It wasn't a name people tossed around lightly. She was the daughter of Richard and Amelia Kingsley, tech billionaires, who had practically built the backbone of British AI infrastructure. Valeria had disappeared 5 years ago in what was presumed to be a tragic house fire at the Kingsley estate. The news had called it a freak accident. The official story said she'd died in the blaze along with her parents. But Elena was very much alive, and if what Shaq was beginning to suspect was true, she wasn't Elena at all. He slipped the bracelet out of the pouch and examined it closely under the lobby's chandelier light. It was even more intricate than he remembered, silver, but not flashy, understated elegance. Then he saw it, etched faintly on the inside of the clasp, VK, not Elena, Valeria Kingsley. Shaq felt a chill crawl down his spine. This wasn't just a homeless girl with a mysterious past. This was the girl the world thought had perished in a fire, the girl whose disappearance had fueled conspiracy theories, documentaries and Reddit rabbit holes for years. He sat down hard on the nearest bench, bracelet clutched in his hand. She'd said not to find her, but now he had to. Shaq returned to his flat and started digging. Articles, photos, forums, anything he could find on the Kingsleys. He learned that the Kingsley estate had been sold off, after the tragedy, their tech empire absorbed by their board of directors. Rumors swirled about embezzlement, fraud and even arson, but nothing was ever proven. Valeria's name had nearly vanished from the public eye. No funeral photos, no body ever recovered, just an estate burned to the ground and a girl who vanished with the smoke. The more Shaq read, the more convinced he became that Elena was telling the truth, even if she hadn't told him everything. But why come back now, and why trust him? He remembered her last words in the cafe. "You're the first person who looked at me like a human being in months." Maybe that's all it took. Someone who didn't want anything from her. Someone who didn't recognize her face from tabloids or tech blogs. But if she was Valeria, then she was in danger. That part was clear. Her parents were dead, the estate was torched, and someone had gone to great lengths to make the world believe she was gone too. Now she was back. And if she was trying to fix something before it's too late, as her letter said, then time was running out for both of them. Shaq closed his laptop and looked down at the bracelet in his hand. VK, he couldn't just let this go. He had to find her. He had to find out what really happened 5 years ago. Because if Valeria Kingsley was alive, then someone powerful wanted her to stay missing, and Big Shaq had just stepped into a storm he didn't see coming. Shaq didn't believe in coincidences, not when it came to a trembling girl on the street wearing a bracelet tied to one of the most powerful families in Britain, not when that same girl vanished overnight, leaving behind a name that tabloids had buried 5 years ago. And definitely not when the world thought Valeria Kingsley had perished in a fire. Yet her eyes had stared back at him from across a cafe table just hours earlier. He needed answers. He started with someone he trusted, his longtime friend Melissa Grant, a senior investigative journalist at a local news station. Shaq called her and simply said, "I need help digging into something. It's sensitive." She didn't ask questions, she just said, "Send me what you've got." Shaq forwarded her the name Valeria Kingsley. Within the hour, Melissa responded with a private archive of old footage and reports. The screen filled with images of luxury, power and tragedy, photos of the Kingsley estate, news clips of their billion-dollar AI company, and finally the breaking news segment from 5 years ago. Tragedy struck the Kingsley family late last night, as their Surrey estate went up in flames. Richard and Amelia Kingsley, founders of Kingsley Quantum Systems, are presumed dead. Their daughter, Valeria Kingsley, age 14, is believed to have perished in the fire. Authorities say the blaze was likely caused by a gas leak. Shaq hit pause. The video cut to footage of Valeria smiling at a gala, walking beside her parents at a tech expo. She looked refined, well-dressed, with sharp eyes and a posture that radiated confidence. But when he squinted, he saw the same cheekbones, the same eye, the same nervous twist of the mouth Elena had when she was trying to hide her emotions. It was her. He was sure of it now, but the question still burned. Why would a billionaire's daughter be sleeping in an alley terrified and alone? He dove deeper. A few hours later, Melissa called back, her voice tight. "Shaq, you were right to call me. The fire was never fully explained. There was a sealed court case afterward, records locked tight. All we know is that there was a short investigation into questionable estate transfers after the Kingsleys died, but it went nowhere. Any idea who took over the company? A man named Julian Voss, former COO, now CEO. He was reportedly very close with the family. But get this, he was also the first to report the fire, said he was on his way to meet Richard Kingsley that night, saw the smoke, and called emergency services." Shaq rubbed his chin. "Too convenient. There's more," Melissa added. 2 weeks after the fire, Voss finalized a merger with a tech security firm in Germany. Kingsley Quantum became Voss Quantum. Since then he's been on Forbes' Top 100 every year. Shaq didn't respond. He was staring at the bracelet in his hand, the one Elena left behind. He decided to take it to a high-end jeweler in Mayfair. The man behind the counter took one look at the velvet pouch and raised an eyebrow. "Where did you get this?" "A friend," Shaq replied. "Can you tell me anything about it?" The jeweler took the bracelet carefully and examined it under a magnifying glass. "Silver, handmade, not mass-produced. You don't see this kind of craftsmanship anymore." Shaq leaned in. "Anything else?" The man nodded slowly. "Look inside the clasp. Right here. See that engraving?" Shaq squinted. There, etched so faintly it could have been missed by the untrained eye, were the words "VK, you are the light of my life." He exhaled. No more doubts. Elena was Valeria Kingsley. The bracelet was a gift, probably from one of her parents, maybe her mother. The message was too personal, too heartfelt for anything else, and yet she was living on the streets. Back at home, Shaq sat in silence. The city buzzed outside his window, but his mind was elsewhere. How does a girl go from being the crown jewel of a tech empire to running from shadow? Why fake her death? Why stay hidden? He pulled up the last photo from Melissa's file, a grainy image taken by a bystander, the night of the fire. Smoke poured from the mansion, flames licking at the windows. A figure in a long coat stood near the tray line, barely visible. Shaq zoomed in. It was blurry, but the height and build looked like a teenage girl. Valeria, he couldn't be sure, but the image gave him a cold feeling in his chest. She had escaped, but from what? The next morning, Shaq returned to the alley where he first found her, empty, no signs of life. He checked the shelters nearby, no one had seen her. Then he tried the cafe. The waitress remembered her, but hadn't seen her again. Days passed, still no word, but the bracelet and the note haunted him. I have to fix something before it's too late. What was she trying to fix? What could a teenage girl possibly take on alone that was so urgent? Unless, it wasn't just about justice. Maybe she had proof, evidence. Maybe she knew something about the fire that no one else did, and that made her dangerous. Shaq's phone buzzed. It was Melissa again. Shaq, you're not going to believe this. There was an anonymous whistleblower report filed 3 weeks ago with the Department of Corporate Fraud. The report accuses Julian Voss of embezzlement, insider trading, and covering up the deaths of the Kingsleys. Shaq sat up straight. Did they trace the source? No. The submission came from an encrypted IP address, routed through 3 countries. But Shaq, guess what name was on the file? What? VK01. Shaq's blood ran cold. She wasn't just hiding, she was fighting back. He looked at the bracelet one last time before slipping it into his pocket. Valeria Kingsley wasn't missing anymore. She was on a mission. And now, so was he. Shaq's heart pounded as he stood in front of the towering iron gates of the Kingsley estate. The mansion, once the symbol of immense wealth and power, now sat in eerie silence, surrounded by overgrown bushes and weeds choking the once perfectly manicured gardens. The stone walls were cracked, and the paint peeled like forgotten memory. Rumors had swirled for years that the Kingsley family had moved abroad after the fire. No one had set foot in the estate since. Officially, the house was abandoned, but Shaq didn't believe. If Valeria was still alive, and he was certain she was, then this place held secrets someone wanted buried. Shaq had a plan. His fame as Big Shaq had opened doors before. Tonight, he'd use it again. He pulled out his phone, hit record and began filming. "All right, guys," he said, his voice low but steady. "We're here at the Kingsley estate. They say it's haunted, abandoned and locked tight. But tonight, we're going inside. Let's see what secrets this ghost mansion hides." He slipped past the gate, which surprisingly wasn't locked, and crept through the overgrown path. His footsteps echoed on the cracked marble floors as he entered the grand entrance hall. Dust covered everything, but it was clear the mansion hadn't been left untouched for long. Fresh footprints in the dust, faint sounds of movement echoing from below. Shaq's skin prickled. He wasn't alone. He slipped toward the basement stairs, careful not to disturb the silence. The air grew colder as he descended, a damp, musty smell filling his nostrils. At the bottom, he found a heavy metal door, locked tight, with a keypad beside it. He stepped back and pulled out his phone to search for clues. As he scanned the room, his eyes caught something taped to the wall beside the door, a faded photograph. It was a picture of Elena, or Valeria. Same face, different ages. 5 photos arranged in a timeline, from a little girl in a school uniform to a teen hiding under a hoodie. Below the photos were yellowed newspaper clippings about Valeria's disappearance. Headlines screamed, "Heiress vanishes after mansion fire, Kingsley tragedy, girl's fate unknown." And was Valeria Kingsley really dead? Then his eyes landed on something that made his heart skip. A red string stretched from one clipping to another, linking names, dates, and places. Shaq realized he was looking at a conspiracy board, and at the center, pinned like a target, was a photograph of Henry Kingsley, Valeria's uncle. Shaq pulled out his phone again, zooming in on the faded printout beside Henry's picture. It was a receipt, dated 6 months after the fire, showing a large cash transfer from Kingsley Tech to a shell company overseas. Next to it, a leather-bound journal lay open on a dusty shelf. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. Valeria must be declared dead. Only then can the inheritance be secured. The estate and company assets will pass to me. The fire was necessary. The plan must not fail. She cannot be found. She must never return. Shaq's jaw tightened. Henry Kingsley had plotted to fake Valeria's death. He'd started a scheme to seize the family fortune, using the fire as a cover. The pieces clicked. Valeria had escaped that night. She'd survived the fire, but her uncle's plan forced her into hiding. She had to live on the streets, wearing rags, hiding her identity to stay safe. Shaq felt a pang of anger and sadness.
No teenager should have to live like this, especially not one born into wealth and love. But there was more. On the far wall, ShaQ noticed a small map with red dots connected by string. Some were locations in London alleyways, shelters, cafes, places that matched where Elena had told him she'd been. And then a new dot, marked in bold red, the Voss building, the headquarters of Julian Voss, the man who had taken over Kingsley Tech. ShaQ's mind raced. Henry Kingsley was one villain, but Julian Voss was the one who had stepped into the power vacuum. Were they working together? Was Voss protecting Henry's secrets, or had he orchestrated the fire himself? ShaQ didn't know yet, but one thing was clear. The truth about Valeria's disappearance was tangled in a web of betrayal, greed and danger. Suddenly, a noise startled him, a sharp creak from the hallway above. ShaQ froze. He grabbed his phone and switched off the flashlight. A shadow moved across the stair. Someone was coming. Without thinking, ShaQ ducked behind a large old bookcase, his heart thundering in his chest. He held his breath. The footsteps grew louder. A man's voice whispered, "The girl's been snooping again. We need to make sure she doesn't get out." ShaQ's eyes wide. Snooping. They knew Valeria was here. They knew she was looking for something. ShaQ's pulse raced. If they were after Valeria, then he was in danger too. The footsteps passed the basement door, fading away. ShaQ waited a full 5 minutes before he dared move. He recorded everything. The conspiracy board, the journal pages, the map. This was evidence. Proof that someone had tried to erase Valeria from history. But ShaQ wasn't going to let that happen. He slipped out of the basement and back through the mansion's front doors. The night air hit him like a blast. He took a deep breath. He had the proof. Now he had to find Valeria. Outside the mansion, ShaQ pulled out his phone and sent the photos and videos to Melissa. Her reply came instantly. "This is huge, but be careful. Whoever did this won't want their secrets exposed." ShaQ smiled grimly. They had uncovered a lie buried in ashes, and the missing heiress was still fighting to take back her life. ShaQ sat in his small studio staring at the screen. He knew the story he was about to tell would shake the internet, and maybe even the world. With trembling hands, he clicked record and began his video. The truth about Elena. She's not who you think. The video started simple. ShaQ recounted the night he found Elena, the girl in the alley, who didn't just beg for change but had a story hidden beneath her hoodie. He showed the bracelet, the delicate silver piece with the engraving, "VK, you are the light of my life." He read the letter she left behind, her plea for understanding, her coded message to anyone who might listen. Then came the conspiracy board, photos, receipts, journal pages, and the tangled web of lies spun by Henry Kingsley. ShaQ didn't hold back. Valeria Kingsley is alive. She's been missing, hiding from a family that betrayed her, a powerful uncle who tried to erase her, a corporate villain who took everything she had. He urged his viewers to share the video, to demand justice, and to open their eyes to the stories hidden in plain sight. The response was immediate. Within hours, the video exploded online. Tens of thousands watched, shared, commented. The story went viral. Headlines popped up worldwide. Billionaire heiress found alive. The untold Kingsley story, from homeless to hero. Valeria's fight for justice. Big Shaq uncovers corporate scandal. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Find Valeria and Justice for Elena. People were shocked, inspired, angry. For the first time in years, Valeria's name was spoken aloud with hope, not sorrow. 2 days later, ShaQ heard a knock on his door. He opened it, heart pounding. There she was, Elena. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I saw your video," she whispered. "I didn't know who else would believe me, but you did." ShaQ pulled her inside and handed her a warm blanket. "Come on, you're safe now," he said gently. That night, they talked for hours. Valeria shared everything, the pain, the betrayal, the loneliness. She told ShaQ how she'd survived the fire by sheer luck, how she'd been forced into hiding because her uncle wanted her gone. But she never gave up. She'd been gathering evidence in secret, trying to expose Henry and Julian Voss, hoping someone would listen. And now, with ShaQ's help, ShaQ immediately contacted a trusted legal team specializing in corporate crimes and missing persons. Together, they reopened the Kingsley case. Investigators pored over the evidence ShaQ and Melissa had uncovered. Within weeks, Henry Kingsley was arrested, charged with fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Julian Voss came under scrutiny as well, his empire shaken by the scandal. But the story didn't end there. Valeria had a choice: reclaim the life she was born into, or build a new path, one of her own making. She chose the latter. With the fortune she legally inherited, she donated millions to youth shelters across the UK. She opened a foundation to support runaway teens, homeless youth, and victims of family abuse. She turned her pain into power. In her first public interview, Valeria sat beside Shaq. The cameras flashed. The world listened. He saw me when no one else did, she said softly, looking at Shaq. Shaq smiled warmly. Sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person who cares. The interview went viral too, inspiring millions around the globe. People wrote letters, shared their own stories, and reached out for help. Valeria became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could shine. Shaq and Valeria remained close friends. Together, they continued to fight for those forgotten by society, for those like Elena, like Valeria, who just needed someone to believe in them. The end. Sometimes life takes people from the highest towers to the coldest streets. Valeria Kingsley, known for years as a missing heiress, was living in the shadows, not because she had to, but because she had been betrayed by the very people meant to protect. But all it took was one act of kindness, one man who chose compassion over judgment, and everything changed. Big Shaq didn't just help a homeless girl, he helped uncover a hidden truth that shook the world and gave a lost soul her voice back. This story reminds us that everyone has a story, and sometimes the person you walk past on the street could be hiding a truth that could change lives. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uncover hidden reality. Leave a comment below. What would you have done if a homeless girl asked you for help? Would you have walked away, or stopped and listened? Remember, one moment of kindness can spark a lifetime of change. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.